Good day, everybody. Zach here with RevZilla, and welcome to another episode of Daily Rider. Our guest today is the BMW R1300 GS, the quintessential adventure touring motorcycle, and this one here behind me will cost you about $25,000. If you've never heard of a BMW GS, you might want to start with a different video, honestly. Something that covers why this is one of the most important, successful, and talked about machines in the history of motorcycling. If you do know what a GS is, well, you might be thinking, I don't know, Zach, it kind of looks like the same basic engine and the same basic suspension, and is there anything that's really new about it aside from the number on the side? Well, I am so glad you asked, because we've got a whole ride to work to talk about it. Buckle up, everybody. Okie dokie, everybody. Quick reminder before we get started here that this video is brought to you by RevZilla. RevZilla is not only the YouTube channel that you are watching right now, but also an e-commerce platform that sells parts, accessories, and apparel for motorcycles and people who love them. A little piece of every dollar you spend at RevZilla.com goes into making videos like this, as well as the shop manual with Harry Henning, CTXP Adventures, and the High Side, Low Side podcast. So the next time you need something for you or your bike, we hope you'll keep us in mind. That's all. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching. Alrighty, we're going to start at the engine as we often do. This is now a 1300cc flat twin. It's otherwise known as a boxer because the cylinders go like this. And yeah, it is sort of foundationally very unchanged from the way it was many decades ago. But of course, the evolution has been extreme, and now includes larger bores than the 1250 it replaces, as well as shorter stroke, I believe, and continues the shift cam technology, which offers variable valve timing. The other big piece of news with the 1300 GS is a new frame. Right here you can see these spars here. These are laser welded sheet metal that are stamped together and glued together and replaces the steel tube trellis that was there before. So you can see this sort of spar here, and there's another one that reaches up and goes up toward the headstock and the back of the front suspension. The back of the bike with the single-sided swing arm and the paralever rear suspension, as well as the front of the bike with the two radiators that are pushed to the side of this massive center shock here that works in tandem with this sort of A-arm that reaches forward from the front of the frame and grabs the fork tubes here, is all very similar in design. Still uses all the sort of telelever anti-dive technology that it has used in the past. As for what's new on the bike, virtually everything. There are a few nuts and bolts and the throttle bodies, so the things that BMW has pointed to that have been pulled over from the 1250 GS, but other than that, it is all new. There will be a link in the description of this video for an article at Common Tread that will include much more detailed descriptions of the options, updates, and overall changes that happened to the 1300 GS. A couple other things I'll point out while we are here. This strange little forehead here is where I'm pretty sure the radar system is housed, because this bike has adaptive cruise control and front collision warning, as well as blind spot warning, which we'll talk about. It also has this new headlight, which is obviously much talked about because it changes the look of the front of the GS quite a bit, which had been pretty recognizable and similar for many, many years. At the back of the bike, you have the other rear-facing radar unit. I believe that's what that is anyway, from Continental. What else we got at the back of the bike here? Saddlebag mounts. I wasn't able to try any luggage because it's all back ordered or hung up in customs or some sort of thing. Another thing I could point out, I suppose, is the rear subframe, which is now cast aluminum and sort of mates with this new stamped and welded mainframe. The skeleton of the bike is actually quite different, and I think it's created a quite different look, right? It's very smooth and groomed and a little bit plasticky, if we're being honest, in these sections of the bike. I appreciate that this area where your leg interacts with the motorcycle as you sit on it is smooth and doesn't have any sort of like sharp edges and stuff. That's smart. But it does change the aesthetic of the bike a little bit, and it definitely makes it look a little more kind of suave and sport tourer and a little bit less rugged. But is it less rugged? Did any of this stuff do anything? Virtually every single part is new on the bike. Does it matter? Well, that's what we'll talk about right now after we fire this bad boy up. I suppose I could clean the dash off here, you know, just sort of do BMW a favor while I'm talking about its product. Get the dust off of there. Pretty standard issue BMW screen at this point, which we'll talk about more later in the ride. For now, we can fire this baby up. All right, we have a new engine, a new frame, redesigned suspension, redesigned electronics, redesigned switchgear. We have an electronic windscreen. We've got a new headlight. We've got different passenger accommodations. I forgot to talk about this. You can move the passenger seat if you want your passenger to sit farther forward. It just lifts up and slides, clicks into position. You can also change practically the density and height of the rider's seat if you flip it over and push a lever from one side to the other. There's really no end to the things you can talk about on a big GS as far as options. So let's roll, shall we? Alrighty, we're rolling along here, kiddos. We can talk about some basic specifications. I said the bike costs $25,000. This particular spec of GS is $24,980 was on the pricing sheet for this particular bike. It does not have the adaptive ride height suspension. It does have the adaptive cruise. There are pretty much literally thousands of different ways you can configure a GS now with different suspensions and different types of and heights of suspension and different seats and windshields and options, and the list goes on and on. But you probably won't get one for less than 20 grand. The fuel tank is a 5-gallon fuel tank, down from 5.3 I believe in the 1250, and with a full 5 gallons of gas on board, this bike weighed in on the daily rider scales at 567 pounds. So it is approximately the same weight as the last 1250 GS we had in-house, even though BMW did a lot of talking about how this bike was lighter. It's 145 claimed horsepowers, and I don't remember how many torques. That information is in the description of this video, of course, as always. I have thus far failed to tell you the seat height. It's because I'm procrastinating. I think it'll be listed at 33.5 inches, but it's another one of those things that can vary a lot depending on what your spec of GS is. And it feels like about that height. It feels, you know, not uncompromising, but substantial, just like the rest of the bike. It's a full-size machine, there's no two ways about that, and it almost feels more appropriate when the seat's a little bit higher. We tested a spec of the 1300 GS that had the low seat option, and it had the adaptive ride height suspension, which lowers as you slow down or stop. That one did feel much more approachable. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. This one feels a little bit more typical GS, and that is very much a good thing because these bikes have historically been quite comfortable, and this one is no different. It's a really lovely riding position with your feet far enough forward that you can put weight on them when you like. The seat is fairly comfortable. The handlebar is just exactly where you'd expect and where you kind of want it to be. It's wide and fairly tall. It's just a very pleasant place to sit. I don't have a lot of complaints. If you look at this right mirror here, you can see this yellow triangle that has illuminated. It's letting me know that there's an enormous truck next to me. That is a blind spot warning. Hopefully you can see it here, and you see if we accelerate away from the truck, the yellow triangle will go away. That's what that is. It uses that radar system in the back to tell you if there's a vehicle in your blind spot. I think it works pretty well. It's supposed to, I think, only detect vehicles that are approaching from behind. So when we pass this truck, for example, I don't think it's supposed to turn on, though it's a big vehicle, so maybe it will. No, see, it didn't turn on, and I think that's intentional. So it's a pretty thoughtful system. It's similar to the one on the Multistrada V4S that we tested a while back. Rider aids is going to be something we see more of. And while we're on the topic, I guess we can flick cruise on. I will set it to, I don't know, we'll set it to like 1,000. We'll set it to 80. And this person's getting out of our way now, so you'll see that we're going to turn it down a little bit to say 75. So as we catch up to the slower moving traffic here, you see we're slowing down. Adaptive cruise still going. I'm going to downshift 6th to 5th to 4th, and it's still active, which I think is pretty cool. Allows you to decide what gear you think you should be in, even though the cruise stays active. While we're cruising along here, we can experiment with the electronic windshield, which rises up with the use of this rocker switch here. Makes for a nice bubble of air. I like it. It's a pretty drastic change from having it all the way down to all the way up. It does not cover my helmet completely, but it does take most of my face out of the wind. The thing that makes me the most angry about adjustable windscreens in general is when they don't adjust enough to make much of a difference. And this one, it's definitely different, whether it's up or down, and I really appreciate that. Normally I spend this time not talking about electronic windshields and adaptive cruise control. I talk about how the bike feels on the highway and whether or not you take it on a long trip. And hopefully it's very obvious that this big GS is a very capable long distance tourer. I would be very surprised if you got a 1300 GS and you were disappointed with a long day on the road. From the standpoint of fuel range and efficiency, I think the highest fuel number that I got on this bike was 44 maybe, and the lowest was in the high 30s somewhere. So yeah, 40 miles a gallon, 5 gallon tank, you're gonna get 200 miles. You should anyway. That's an acceptable amount. I think much less than that would be disappointing, and if you ride aggressively, you're gonna wanna fill up well before 200 miles. BMW is flirting with the GS having not enough fuel range in my opinion, but of course, in typical BMW fashion, there is the GS Adventure, which offers a much larger fuel tank and longer legs on the highway. Okay, last thing on the list is mirrors, and the GS mirrors are good as far as being smooth and visually pretty good, though I have struggled a little bit to make them point in exactly the right direction. Maybe that sounds silly. They feel small. I don't think that they're actually a different size than previous generations. Maybe they are, but I often find myself being like, oh, I wish I could see more behind me and more to the side of me, and I just sort of like struggle to get them in exactly the right position, whatever that's worth. All right, time for the old